Just have a man do it. That's what I do. Just have a man do it. Hello, my name is Jolene Teresa. I'm the founder of Studio X Presents, and today we are talking about building sets, which can sometimes be confused with building props, and sometimes those are the same things or interchangeable. So let's get into it. We're going to be talking about 5 different elements of building sets: design, measurements, materials, lighting, and creativity. These are not the only parameters for building sets, but when you're getting started, this is what our team does to ensure that we're all on the same page and that we have something feasible for our event. Designing your set. You want to make sure that you have your ideal of what you want in your design, and then you're being realistic about it. I am not good at this. I create these very intense designs that are no way feasible for my team or realistic for the fact that we are doing one-off events. And it's really only a one-time, one-day thing. So if you can, be incredibly realistic with not just your expectations, but with what you're designing. Now, when you're designing, you may think, I don't have any experience with designing programs or designing sets at all, which is where the dollar store comes in. You're gonna run over and get yourself graph paper, just regular graph paper. I believe this is 1/4 inch. And you're gonna take the measurements from the venue. These are my home measurements of my home, but I do this for venues as well. And you're gonna draw out a scale model, and then you're gonna cut out little pieces of paper the size of what you're planning. This helps you make sure that everything is in a location that is convenient, it's movable. Maybe you have audience members or different guests walking around in the space. You're gonna wanna make sure there's enough space in between so that they can get through, including handicap accessibility. Now, creating your designs like this is the initial plan. You want it on paper so you can see what everything is going to look like when you're space planning. You want to move things around and make sure that you have enough space, that things can pass by one another, and that your team is not going to have a hard time setting up these sets. Additionally, you're going to want to make a 3D model if you're not great with measuring things and visualizing in your head, especially if you're not familiar with the space. Now, if you're using the same space over and over, you can kind of figure out what's going to work and what isn't just based on memory. But if it's a new space or a new design, you may want to create a physical 3D small scale of the space to make sure that what you're planning is going to fit. If you're thinking, this is a lot, that's correct. Ask for help. I ask people for help all the time, especially if it's something I don't know if it's realistic, because I know it's possible, but is it realistic? And I ask for help as well because you want to keep cost in mind. I am not good at this. You want to make sure that what you're planning and what you're doing are going to be cost effective, because things can get out of hand pretty quickly. Figure out what is cost effective. What is your ideal and what's realistic? What do you need to have and what's okay if you don't have? One of our event themes was Let Them Eat Cake, and I got it in my brain that we were building a 6-foot life-size cake for someone to jump out of. That ate our entire budget, which meant I needed to figure out how to decorate the rest of this space without building any additional sets, because that cake was incredibly expensive. But I had it in my brain that we needed it, and at the end of the day, I'm really happy that we did it because it looked so good. And I'm surprised at the amount of people who were surprised that someone jumped out of the cake, because it was massive and it was a huge pain, but it was worth it. So to cut costs, we decorated the catwalk and we just made sure we had enough fillers to make it look like there was a giant set, when in reality, we didn't do any set building. We just put fabric and bows on a catwalk to make it look like a cake. We also added small things like confetti and streamers to make it look like a big deal, even though we really only had one set. And that set piece was technically a prop. Now, the second thing you want to make sure you're doing is taking measurements. Measure twice, cut once. Measure twice, cut once. This is a saying for a reason, because you really want to make sure that you are measuring and that everything is exact and what you need it to be. Now, you also want measurements of your space. So you want measurements of the area that you have been allotted. You want height, depth, width, every measurement that you can get. If there are smaller pieces like a catwalk, or maybe there's stadium seating and you want to put something on part of that stadium, you need to get all of those measurements and ask if they're exact measurements. We work with a venue a lot that has stadium seating, but the stadium seating is on rollers, much like a gymnasium. So we know that there's always going to be a little bit of give with the measurements that we have, and we have to keep that in mind to make sure that we have enough space for what we need. So we're constantly padding the space planning based on the measurements we have and the understanding that those measurements may not be exact and they may change. I cannot stress this enough. Do not use your human physical body as a measuring tool for exact measurements. It is not exact. Now, we do have a crew member who is approximately 5 feet tall and her wingspan is approximately 5 feet. So if someone asks us, how far apart are the poles? I can say, well, they're about 2 Vanessas apart, which is approximately 10 feet. And I can show them photos, which is funny, but we also know that this is a very approximate measurement. In no way are we saying it's exact. So if you need to measure something, kind of, but not really, you just need to know if maybe a wheelchair will fit through or if a prop you have will fit through, fine. But when you're building sets, don't measure using a human body because it's inconsistent. And never do this because your body is going to move around and that measurement is not accurate. Measuring tape is incredibly inexpensive. You could even use a piece of string and then measure it later, but make sure you have exact measurements. As far as venues go, they usually have some type of space plan, floor plan, blueprint that they can give you with fairly accurate measurements, and you're going to want that to make sure whatever set you're building fits. And if you're like me, you're going to want a contingency plan. So if they say it's 14 feet, 6 inches high, whatever set I'm making, I'm not going to make it 14.6. I'm going to make it 14 feet. And if I want it to be flush, I'm going to add a 4-inch extension and a 2-inch extension. That way, if it is 14.6 and I can fit 14.6 underneath it, I have all of the tools needed to do so. But if it's just barely 14.6, I can do 14.4. And if it's nowhere close, whatever set I've built will slide directly under whatever height it is, as long as it's above 14 feet, because I did the initial 14 with a 4-inch extension and a 2-inch extension. Yeah, it's a lot of additional work, but that additional work up front is going to help me when I bring the set into the space. And like we talked about before, make a 3D model. You can use foam board, cardboard, whatever you want, even paper works. But make a 3D model, a physical space model of the set and the space. Even if that's just you drawing on graph paper and holding that up and moving this physical box around, you want to make sure that you have these exact measurements, because day of, you're not going to be able to fix it easily. Now, if you have a handyman on staff, great, because they may be able to fix it on site, but not all adjustments are easy. So make sure that you have those measurements exact and that you have a contingency plan. Next, we're going to talk about materials, sourcing materials for building your set. Buy it in the exact color and size, just do it. If it's a couple dollars more, just buy it, because when you go to paint it, it's annoying and it's not always cost effective. I mean, if the color you want is double the price of just getting it plain and it's a substantial amount, yeah, maybe if you don't really care about the outcome or if you're just really good at painting, but honestly, just buy it close enough or in the exact size or color that you need, because it's gonna be a huge pain trying to do all of that additional work. It seems like not a big deal, but anyone who's done any kind of craft project knows The second you go to do it, one thing goes wrong and another thing goes wrong and another thing goes wrong, and it becomes this huge issue that it doesn't need to be. So if you can, just buy it in the color and size needed. You can also repurpose. We are really big on repurposing old sets, old props, old equipment, not necessarily as far as circus equipment, but as far as sets go. So we have a ton of random fabric and wood and cardboard and plastic on hand, all in our storage unit, simply because we might be able to use it for something in the future. Now that giant 6-foot cake we talked about earlier, although we didn't save the cake itself, and I did end up making a smaller version for a different event, we did save all of the additional pieces from that cake that can now be used for new sets. We did make it out of hardboard and cardboard, and a lot of that was saved for future sets. Repurposing different pieces from sets is not that challenging, especially if you have fairly basic sets to start with. You can cut, paint, and maneuver a lot of the pieces around to create something new. So look at what you have already on hand and try to figure out if that's usable, and if it's not, is there a way that you might be able to use it later? If you can't repurpose, can you recycle? This is where marketplace, recycling centers, thrift stores come in handy. You can easily go get something that's kind of close to what you need, but it will cut costs if you buy that thing and fix it. Again, this is only if you're fairly handy. If you're not into crafts, maybe don't go this route. Spend a little more to get exactly what you need, but recycling can also be a really inexpensive and convenient way. Sometimes you find something that isn't exactly what you're looking for, but it will definitely work. Things that we at Studio X like to collect are large boxes, shipping pallets, anything foam that we can reuse again later. We even collect old furniture. We've definitely repurposed pieces of old furniture. We made swings one year, and those were actually really heavy-duty shelves that we cut and painted. So repurpose and recycle whatever you can and be creative about it. Remember, if you're doing an event where people are going to be close to whatever set you're creating, then you're probably going to want it to be of decent quality because people are going to touch it, lean on it, take pictures of it, etc. If you're doing a show and the set's going to be on stage, it may not need to be as detailed or as pretty because people are only going to be seeing it from a distance. So figure out what that distance is and make sure that it looks good from that distance. That's all that truly matters. If people are only going to see it from a minimum of 30 feet away, then it doesn't have to be completely detailed because no one's going to see that. So you could easily have a shoddy paint job because no one's going to know. Now, again, keep costs in mind here because things can get out of hand quickly. A DIY project should be less expensive than getting it done professionally or buying it exactly how you want it. Make sure you're not doing the IKEA DIY where you buy something that's only 80 bucks, but then you do $300 worth of DIY, which makes it more expensive than just buying the piece you wanted. Just keep costs in mind, add it all up ahead of time. Is it cheaper to just get exactly what I want? Because that's more cost effective, which gives you a bigger budget for other parts of your set or your show or event. If DIY is better, then DIY it and maybe you'll learn something. Now, you may or may not be using materials that you know and understand. If you're unfamiliar with a material, ask for help. There are a lot of groups on social media that you can ask for recommendations or references. As you build your network, you can message people with simple questions like, hey, have you worked with hardboard before? Can I just cut it with a Sawzall? What do I need to use? And understanding the stability of your materials. So you'll want to make sure that whatever material you're using is going to be able to stabilize whatever you're building. You don't want to build an unstable set, even if your audience is not going to be close to it, because your cast and crew are, and we want to make sure that we're not putting them in any minor danger. Another thing we like to keep in mind is lighting. Now, lighting can change the way that your set looks, especially if your venue has some type of backlighting or LED bars that have colored lighting. You can adapt and adjust your set at a lower cost. So maybe you want to change the color of something and you know you're going to use this multiple times, but it needs to be different colors. Instead of painting it, why don't you just light it? So if you paint it white, you can have green lighting when you need it green and red lighting when you need it red. So use lighting not just for color, but also for shadow and depth. So you can create illusions with lighting. Maybe you have some type of box or cityscape and you want it to look like it's further away. You can adjust the lighting even if it's not physically movable. You can adjust the lighting even in the ceiling to make it look like it's further by casting longer shadows using light further away. Or maybe you're using darker lighting on the inside so that your cast members or crew are lit, but they're not as well lit because you want it to be dark in there, making it look bigger, more hollow, whatever it may be. Also remember that uplighting, although not aesthetically pleasing if you're trying to make people look pretty, it can do wonders with your set as it can make things look taller or longer. So if you're not really interested in lighting, now may be the time to get interested or make friends with someone who is. Having a really great lighting tech or lighting person that can advise you on how lighting can affect your set could do wonders, and it could save you a lot of money. A show that's really well lit is going to be noticeable versus a show that's not really well lit because the vibe's just kind of off. If you're not really familiar with the lighting at the venue you're using, again, ask someone. And if you don't have someone to ask, look it up or ask the venue, hey, we were hoping that this light does this and that we can use it for this. Is that possible? Most of the times when you're working with a venue, you have a tech advance anyways where you can ask them questions like this if you don't have your own lighting tech that you're bringing in, but definitely don't sleep on lighting. Lighting will change your set game. The biggest thing with designing or creating anything is literal imagination and creativity. So think about what you're trying to build. Does it exist somewhere else already? Think out of the box. Most people think, I need to build a cityscape, so I need boards and I need them to stand up and I have to paint a city. Yeah, you could, but if you have a catwalk, you could also just buy really inexpensive black paper and cut out the top of the cityscape, which gives the illusion of a city because you're showing that black skyline, but you're not actually having to put in all this work and effort and buy all of these materials to create a cityscape, which is going to cut into your budget. So not only are we looking for things that we already have to repurpose and recycle and reuse by creativity and imagination, but also illusion. Can you make it look like a thing without it being a thing? So just like we talked about with the cityscape, something we've done at Studio X, one of our shows, again, Let Them Eat Cake, we had that giant cake, which ate up so much of our budget. So instead of having to build more set and add more items, we just went for an overall decor. We had one piece of really long white fabric that we draped on the catwalk and we scalloped. Then we just used construction paper to make these giant glittery bows, which looks a lot like a dress, but also similar to a cake. So instead of creating more elements of this cake, we just kept the illusion of a cake going. Your creativity knows no bounds. So think about all these weird things you can do that will make it look like or seem like something without actually having to spend a ton of time and money creating the thing. If you have suggestions or questions, definitely comment them down below because we love hearing all the weird ways people have made things work. If you're interested in seeing some of the things we've done, you can check out the show archives on our website, studioxpresents.com. And if you're interested in learning more about production, you can check out our course on the website as well, which goes in detail, and we do add to it pretty often with new information on how to build sets and produce events. As always, stay safe out there.